Welcome to My Weekly Mixtape, a podcast that takes the classic mixtape approach to building a modern playlist. I'm your host, Brian Colburn. Joining me tonight are Jesse and Sylvan, hosts of the Perfectly Good podcast. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you so much. You know, if there's one thing I love more than John Hiatt, it might be the classic task of building a great mixtape. So this is just my happy place.
And I am so thrilled to be back a second time. You and I, Brian, did a Bruce Springsteen podcast. And even then, I was going, God, we got to do this with Sylvan and John Hiatt. We got to do this thing with Sylvan and John Hiatt.
Well, I am so glad we're finally able to make that happen. This is awesome. Yeah, Jesse, we did the ultimate Bruce Springsteen playlist. So you got to answer my first-time guests question, but Sylvan hasn't. So Sylvan, as a first-time guest, what does the word mixtape mean to you?
Well, it's actually funny. The first time I talked with Jesse, I shared that I was introduced to John Hiatt by my aunt and uncle, who are the coolest people in the world. And they lived up in the hills of Vermont when I was a small kid. That was in the 80s and 90s. So when you came to Vermont in the 80s and 90s, there was no internet, there was no cable TV. What we did was sit around and listen to their immense music collection and specifically make tapes for my mom to then drive back to Boston where we both lived. And usually what we did was she would choose an album that she was interested in, and then side B would be the mixtape that we'd get to fill in. And as I grew up, it was kind of my rite of passage that I got to make a selection on these mixtapes and get to expand my knowledge. So it really is about family, it's about connection, it's about communication, and it's about a love of music. And, you know, at its best, I think music reflects things about ourselves and our relationships back at us, and it brings us both closer together. So the mixtape is a sacred space of connection in my mind.
All right. What an awesome answer. I love it. Now, tonight, the three of us have a challenge in front of us because we're tasked with taking 24 of John Hiatt's studio albums, and that's before counting his live albums or his compilations, starting with 1974's Hanging Around the Observatory, all the way through 2021's Leftover Feelings with the Jerry Douglas Band. And we have to whittle it down, because there's three of us tonight, to 12 songs. So I could say that with relative ease, we're going to upset fans of at least 12 different John Hiatt albums. So Sylvan, I'll start with you. How did you approach your bank of songs that you're bringing to the table this evening, since you only could choose 4 songs out of 24 albums?
Well, I really struggled with, is this a mixtape? Is it an anthology? Is it a best of? Or, you know, is it a reflection of who I am as a John Hiatt fan? Is it a communication, a conversation between you gentlemen and myself? And I landed somewhere in between. So my approach was that we need a little bit of all of the different Johns, because he has changed quite a bit over the course of his career. Jesse and I are going through the process of every song in alphabetical order, thankfully rating, not ranking. And if we just looked at those songs that we have both called perfect at a 5-star song, we'd already, only going into the L's of the alphabet, have to be at like 5 mixtapes. So I really had to say, this isn't the best of John Hiatt. It is let's say that you really wanted to kind of introduce someone to the multiple sides of John Hiatt and give just a taste that would want them to wet their whistle and really dive into the rest of the stuff. That was my approach.
And Jesse, I'll throw that same question to you.
Yeah, so I did similar. I took our spreadsheet and said, okay, what songs have we rated? I've rated a 5, and in our scale is 1 through 5. So I had a list of all the songs through where we are now, real time, that were 5s. And I said, okay, that's kind of my basis. Then I had other songs that I knew for personal reasons I wanted to be on this. And then the third one was one of the things that I love about your concept and the idea of a mixtape is this has to flow.
Mhm.
Think of this
Mhm.
as a wine and hors d'oeuvre tasting party, right? Like you can't just randomly bring appetizers and random wines. You need to pair them and they need to flow. So I said, okay, I know I want this couple of songs. Luckily, I don't go first, Sylvan, so I can follow Sylvan's lead and then kind of, okay, well, let's try to make this roll. And one thing that made me very happy, and spoilers, you've already said in a year or two, we can do volume two. So I'm like, okay, great. That makes me feel a little better.
Well, my goal for this evening is simply to try to keep up with both of you because you guys talk week in and week out about all the songs from his catalog, like you said, in alphabetical order. And tonight, we're only talking about 12 songs. So I'm really happy that tonight's 12-hour episode is dedicated to his music. Though this is actually going to be the hard part. We have to keep this to a regular hour episode when you guys are used to opening up the floor and talking about his songs at great length. So instead of waxing poetic any longer, let's just get down to business. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Sylvan, Jesse, and I will be curating the ultimate John Hiatt playlist using a roundtable approach with our overall goal for this episode to be crafting the best mixtape possible through these dozen songs. We're trying to tell the John Hiatt, as far as I'm concerned, a 101 story, something that gives people an introduction if they haven't heard his music before. At the end of the show, you could take our conversation to the next level by visiting the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com to give our final mixtape a listen via the embedded playlist. And if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. There you can find ad-free episodes of the show, get early access to future My Weekly Mixtape episodes, chime in on upcoming topics, become a future guest, and so much more. And a few of the Patreon mixtapers chimed in with the songs they would use to kick things off for tonight, and I want to give a quick shout out to those. Chad Lamassa chimed in saying he'd start with the classic Have a Little Faith in Me from Bring the Family. And Brandon from Virginia chimed in saying, nice, so many choices. And he chose one that suits Brandon and my recent episode on the Ultimate Inspirational Rock playlist, that being the live version of Through Your Hands from Hiatt Comes Alive at Budokan. Once again, if you'd like to chime in for future My Weekly Mixtape episodes, come join the Mixtaper community at patreon.com/myweeklymixtape. And Sylvan, with that being said, I'm pressing the record button on our mixtape. What song is going to kick off the festivities tonight?
Well, to answer that question, I had to first ask the questions that Uncle Todd and Lynn would ask me. Is this going to be mellow? Is this going to be fast? Are we grabbing people's attention? Are we being obscure? Are we going mainstream? Are we going to be predictable? Are we going to take some risks? And I was trained in the mixtape to take some risks,
All
which
right.
means that I am neither going to go slow nor fast. I am going to pick a song that gives us a little bit of everything, and one that not many people would know, but features, in my mind, John's quintessential backup band, the Goners. That is a song called Let It Ride, which occurred on the Country Bears soundtrack. So
Yes.
I imagine not many people would know that. Although if you visited Perfectly Good Podcast to hear Brian, you may know about the Country Bears soundtrack because he joined us to talk this song, Let It Ride. And I think it's the perfect way to start because it does give you a little bit of everything, John. You have him kind of starting out solo and backwoods, and then you have the band kicking in and the full rock. And most of all, you have the classic John Hiatt, clever lyrics that made you kind of stop and think and hungry for more.
Yeah, I love that choice. I did not know this song till at the very first meeting of Sylvan and I, when she joined me on Set Lusting Bruce for John Hiatt month. She shared this where she had the album she wanted to talk about, and she shared the soundtrack. So I loved it. I loved our discussion that we had with Brian. And this gave me a moment because last weekend, Linda was in the living room and she was about to go to bed. And I said, "Hey, do you have a minute?" She goes, "Sure." I said, "I want to play you something." And so I pulled up the video of the Animatic Bears. I'm like, "I want you to watch this." And she's looking at me like, "What? Have you lost your mind?" And I hit play, and they're doing the instrumental, and all of a sudden the voice, and Linda goes, "Oh my God, that's John Hiatt." And she made me play the song 2 or 3 times. She made me read the lyrics to it. She says, "That is as a perfect John Hiatt song as I've ever heard. How the hell did we not know this one?" So thank you for that, Sylvan. And I think this sets us off perfectly.
I couldn't agree more. To me, this is the perfect road trip driving song. There's just something that's so freeing and so open about the song. It's upbeat, it's happy, but it's not a straight ahead rocker and it's not a heartfelt ballad. It kind of sits right in the middle and it gives us a place to bounce off in many different directions. And I love his lyrics. There's something that always I grasp onto. So I'm just going to drop my favorite lyric from the song here. And then I'll tell people to head over to the episode page at myweeklymixtape.com because I'll embed our entire Let It Ride discussion on the John Hiatt episode page in case you want to take it down a much more in-depth discussion about this incredible song. And every mistake is a break, but only if you get it. Let it ride, let it ride, let it ride. This song, my wife and I went to a movie theater up in New Hampshire. It was called Smitty's at the time. And we were just looking to go try this movie theater that you can have dinner at, have drinks, and watch a movie. Now, this is back in 2002, so this wasn't basically every movie theater ever. This was an experience. So we show up, and the only movie that was playing was The Country Bears. And I said, well, how bad could it be? It's a movie about musicians, even though it's animatronic bears or whatever you want to call it. It's Jim Henson's team made them. So I said, let's give it a try. What the hell? As soon as the movie opened, I started like elbowing her across the table going, this is John Hiatt. And the whole movie, I was just blown away that John Hiatt was the voice for the Country Bears. And as soon as the movie was over, we went right to Best Buy and I bought the soundtrack. And I've loved it ever since. It's an amazing soundtrack. And I hope that any John Hiatt song from the Country Bears soundtrack you guys ask me to join you again for, because there are plenty from this soundtrack that I could easily include on our mix tonight. But with 24 albums that we still haven't touched yet, I don't know, because this is one of the outliers right from the beginning. So bravo, Sylvan. And with that, Jesse, I'm throwing it to you to follow that up with track 2.
So I think we're always looking for true north. And so as we're continuing, I think she started out us on our road trip. So I'm going to go Drive South from Slow Turning. Couple special things. I love this song. I think it's really, really a special, lovely song. Susie Bogus had a hit with it. And this is also kind of a wink and a hug to my sister in all things Hiatt, because that was one of the other songs that meant a lot to her emotionally. And when it gets to her turn to talk about it, she can explain why. But I said, okay, if we're going to let it ride, where are we going to ride? We're going to drive south.
Well, as Jesse alluded to, I was 9 when Slow Turning came out, and it was the album that I heard the most in the car because I wasn't yet driving. And my mom and I took a little trip to visit my grandmother in Florida from Boston. And she thought it would just be so sweet every time that Drive South came on to sing to me with the one you love. So, yes, it has a very sentimental meaning to me. And it's a great song. Another of the things that I picked up from Lynn and Todd is that you really can't go wrong if you're throwing something on a mixtape with either track 1 or track 3, because artists almost always put their bangers there to grab your attention and then keep you hooked. This is a classic example of a track 1 that just really sets off the album Slow Turning, which is his, I think, signature album that really let it all out of the gates. And I love that we are continuing going back in time, but keeping that same band. So we've got that continuity of the mixtape going. So I absolutely support this choice.
I love the song. I'm going to finish your lyrics, Jesse, because you started it with, we're always looking for true north, but you can't say that and not say with our head in the clouds, just a little off course. I love this song. You mentioned Susie Bogus's cover, which reached #2 on the Billboard US Hot Country Songs chart. Kelly Willis recorded a version on her 1990 debut album, Well Traveled Love, and the Forrester Sisters, featuring the Bellamy Brothers, covered the song on their 1990 album, Come Hold Me, which that version reached #63 on the Billboard US Hot Country Songs charts. I never looked at John Hiatt as a country artist. I looked at him always as a rock artist, but there's something about his sound that translates so effortlessly to country music. And I know we're only talking about 12 songs tonight, but I can pretty much guarantee, at least from my bank, that there's going to be at least 1 or 2 songs where we talk about the fact that John Hiatt is a songwriter's songwriter. For somebody who loves songwriting, John Hiatt is one of the best. And he is one of those people that when you say his name to the average music listener, they might go, that name sounds familiar. I don't know where it rings a bell. And then you start rattling off all the songs he's written that other artists have taken to stratospheric heights. And it's absolutely mind-blowing. And I think I'm going to use that mindset along with the road trip mindset that, Sylvan, you started with Let It Ride, and Jesse, you continued with Drive South, because we're still on the road, and we're going to go back to the title track from 1983's Riding with the King.
Well done.
Yes, well done.
Thinking about cover songs here, you can't not talk about B.B. King and Eric Clapton, who covered the song for the album of the same name. John rewrote some of the lyrics for their version, but come on, this is an all-killer, no-filler rendition. I mean, how can it not be with B.B. King and Eric Clapton together? But it just goes to show that if those two giants are looking to a John Hiatt song for inspiration for a good track and for an album title, that just escalates John Hyatt's credibility as far as I'm concerned. But on top of B.B. King and Eric Clapton, if we want to keep that blues theme going, recent My Weekly Mixtape guest Joe Bonamassa also covered the song with Mahalia Barnes as a bonus studio track at the end of his Live at the Greek Theater album. His version was called Riding with the Kings, with an S, because that live album was actually a tribute to 3 kings, Freddie King, Albert King, and the aforementioned B.B. King. So when all of that points back to John Hiatt, and we've got this road trip vibe going so far, Riding with the King.
I love that you reached back a little bit further. And yeah, everything that you said about the song being covered by multiple people, and what better pedigree of musicians could you ask for than B.B. King and Eric Clapton? It's a perfect little cruiser, and you can't imagine not riding along in a Cadillac as you listen to this song. So it's also fits the mixtape for a great drive in my perspective, that it kind of transports you to maybe even a better life and a better set of wheels than what you might be riding along in. And yeah, I think that's a great new direction to put us in.
Yeah, I think between Let It Ride and Drive South, there was this upbeat, happy road trip vibe, but Riding with the King has that black sunglasses, top down on the convertible, arm hanging out the side, Joe Cool, if you remember Snoopy, look happening. There's a swagger to that guitar riff that just oozes personality. So it's one of my favorite riffs by him. And obviously, if it caught the attention of those other artists, he
Yeah.
must be doing something right.
All right. I can't not actually give a little bit away since we haven't talked about that song that John actually borrowed that guitar from Nick Lowe. And when he came up with that lick and he came up with that performance that's captured on Riding with the King, Nick Lowe said that guitar is yours now. And so I love that. And I think it says everything you need to know about the performance that gets captured there.
Yeah, I could talk an hour about this song, but I will not. If you are a regular listener to Perfectly Good Podcast, you know that Slugline was the first CD that my wife at the time was my girlfriend exposed me to, and it was John Hiatt. And as the new albums came, I liked John Hiatt because I was dating Linda, and Linda liked John Hiatt. And when I got Riding with the King on cassette, that became my first John Hiatt album. It became the album that I went, oh, I'm not liking this because I'm dating Linda. I'm liking this because I love this cassette. And so I'm thrilled every time he does it live. I think it's a perfect, kind of cap to our little trilogy. We're starting out with a three-fer like the old FM stations used to do. They do, three of a kind.
Uh-huh.
I'm so glad that we got something pre-trilogy.
Mhm.
And this is just, it's wonderful.
And I would be
Yeah.
remiss if I didn't mention my favorite lyrics in this song because I didn't get to that part. But well, I stepped out a mirror at 10 years old with a suit cut sharp as a razor and a heart of gold. I had a guitar hanging just above waist high, and I'm going to play that thing until the day I die. Sylvan, back to you for track 4.
All right. Thank you, Brian, for mentioning the dates that we're going through so far. I really felt that it was important to not just have a taste of the classic John that we know and love and might instantly come to mind when we're thinking about what are the songs that we need to put on our mixtape. I felt that we absolutely need to make sure that we represent the new John Hiatt, or at least newer John Hiatt. And I was thinking about what of his songs, and let's say the past decade or two, that when it came out, I instantly wanted to get in my car and drive around and listen to over and over again, which again is my affiliation with or association with a mixtape. And I had to go with a song produced by Kevin Shirley with a great rocking tone and a great sing along chorus. So I'm going all the way to Mystic Pinball in 2012 for
Nice.
We're All Right Now. And
Nice.
I defy you to listen to that and not tap your toe on the gas pedal a little bit and to sing along. So let's get the energy back up from that kind of dark place from Riding with the King.
It feels good like eating ice cream, so I gotta have a little bit every day. Yeah, I love that we picked something because it's really easy, and I was guilty of it. The core Hyatt albums are really hard not to go since we're only doing, this limited amount of songs. So I was really glad you picked it. We haven't talked about it yet. I'm really looking forward because it's a W.
Uh-huh.
And as Sylvan likes to remind our listeners, when we signed up for this, one of the things I said is that if we start, we got to finish. And so as we're on L's, we've got a little bit of a highway in front of us. Great choice. I love this one.
The sun comes up every morning, even when it's too cloudy to see. I was willing to lose that years ago. Don't know what was the matter with me. I'm so happy we're getting into the New West Records phase because his run from 2003's Beneath This Gruff Exterior through 2021's Leftover Feelings that I mentioned at the top of the show is truly an era for Hiatt. And I'm using quote marks because it's his longest era, if you really think about it. It's been running strong for over 20 years now. And Mystic Pinball, to me, might be the chef's kiss of the New West Records phase of all the albums. I actually had 2 songs from the album in my bank tonight, and that was the back-to-back My Business and I Just Don't Know What to Say. So when you talk about songs that go from one side of the spectrum to the other, it was those 2 songs. And depending on where we went, I figured My Business has that boppy, upbeat stomp to it. And I Just Don't Know What to Say is an absolutely gorgeous track. But We're All Right Now has this feeling and vibe to it that does play along with the songs we've been talking about so far. And like I said, you can't go wrong with the New West phase, but it's probably the most underrated phase of his career because most people go to the 80s stuff like both of you talked about, and then his 90s stuff that maybe we'll get to tonight because we haven't touched on the 90s yet. I don't know. I don't want to assume here. So with that, Jesse, we are back to you to follow up We're All Right Now.
So I loved that twist from Sylvan, and I debated on picking something from this New West era, but I really, when we talked about that, Sylvan said that push comes to shove, Let It Ride might be her favorite John Hiatt song. You know, it's hard to pin down, but if you had to. And I got to thinking, what would mine be? And I realized it's Your Dad Did from Bring the Family. I loved that whole album, but something about that song, the humor in it, the vision of your wife with the house slightly undone, the oatmeal on your son, and just this image. And I feel that way sometimes as a father, just trying to keep everything going and the mass chaos. And you love your wife and kids just like your dad did. We're all imperfect as fathers, but we try to do the best we can. And I could sit here and quote the whole song because the lyrics just, you go buy a new car just to hide how, scared you feel and all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, I don't know if it fits the pattern as much, but I am going to just personal. I've got to get your dad in. And also, I think this shows John's humor. So if someone is watching along with this, you go, oh, wait a minute. This guy can put his tongue firmly in his cheek and have a little fun with it.
Agreed, Jesse. And I think another part of John's very unique skill as a songwriter is to make these characters that live and breathe well beyond the 3 minutes of the song that we hear. And this is a perfect example of you feel like you spent at least 2 hours worth of a movie hearing about this person in Your Dad Did. And it could be John, it could be another version of a fictional character. And it would be really lacking in our mixtape if we didn't have something with as good of a line as "May my brother's hamster burn in hell," which just comes out of nowhere. And I think it's a great example of how John Hiatt can grab you with some lyrics and at the same time make you laugh, but also make you think about how humans relate to each other. And I will tip my hand a little bit since it is going to be so long until we talk about this, that the very first time I met Lily Hiatt, I had to ask her, I said, "You've probably heard this 1,000 times, but did you actually sit at the dinner table and pray for your brother's hamster to go to hell?" And she laughed and said, "No one has ever asked me that. And I honestly don't know the answer, but I suspect I did because I was a pretty bratty kid." So hopefully we'll have her join for Your Dad Did. And yeah, I think a mix without all of these things, the, great funky rhythms that he got in there, the absolute joy of family. Because if you think about John Hiatt, we talk about his recovery trilogy in that he found a new family with his third wife and they had a baby together. And I don't think you can separate the two of John Hiatt, the family man, and John Hiatt, the successful musician. So this song is a perfect addition to our mixtape.
I will tell you, I have that sense of joy and surprise every time I hear the song. Like the first time I heard Help the Starving Children to Get Well, and I hope my brother's hamster burns in hell. When you heard it the first time, it was amazingly funny. And I get that same feeling every time I hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't matter that you already know the ending. It's the journey that he takes you on every time you hear the song.
Of course. And I think that's a hysterical line in the song. My personal favorite line, because as an only child, I've been told this many a times, at least the first part, you're a chip off the old block. Why does it come as such a shock that every road up which you rock, your dad already did? As a father and a son, there's something about that set of lyrics that just really hits home for me. We talked about the lyrics, and the story behind the song, but let's not minimize the guitar work in this song. That
Absolutely.
opening walk down on the guitar that harmonizes and builds at the beginning. And I mean, you think about the lineup of John with Ry Cooder and Jim Keltner and Nick Lowe. I know we talk about Slow Turning being the John Hiatt album, but Bring the Family, you don't get to a Slow Turning without Bring the Family's success. And I feel like he was on the way to Slow Turning on this album. And for some reason, those two albums feel like they're cut from the same block, if you will, at least from a frame of mind he was in as a songwriter at the time.
Yeah, I think it was the start of him trying to be true to himself as opposed to letting the record companies tell him, you're going to be the next Elvis Costello or you're going to be the next folk singer, blues singer, whatever. He just decided to be himself. Before there was ever a genre called Americana, John Hiatt was blazing this path with those two albums and everything that came after, I would argue, that was this new sound that was based in heartfelt truth and roots rock and all of those things that you were just talking about, Brian.
Well, we're at the halfway mark now for track 6, and we haven't hit the 90s yet, so I have to put an end to that right now. And I'm just going to go to the year I graduated high school, the year I started college. It's a very big year for me. It's the year I discovered John Hiatt. But I'm not going to pick the song that I discovered him with just yet. I'm going to pick one of my favorites, similar to what Jesse did. And it's a different vibe because the heart won't remember the burning fire the next time you feel the flame of desire. From 1995's Walk On, I'm going to go with Cry Love. This entire song screams out to me that it's better to have lost a love than never to have loved at all. And there's something about the chorus of the song when he hits those high notes. It literally, I'm just talking to you about it, and the hair on my arms is standing up because this song, every time I hear it, just makes me feel what he's singing about. I saw him in Rutland, Vermont. I want to say the year was 2008, and his version of Cry Love with the trio moved me to tears. It was just gorgeous. And this song is beautiful, and the timing of it has this backbeat through the whole song, but at the end, they just start rocking out to it, and it kind of brings you out of it and brings you into the rockier side of John Hiatt. So it kind of encompasses everything I love about his music. It's pulling on the heartstrings, it's emotional, but it also rocks. It's a little bit of everything I love about John Hiatt. So Cry Love to follow up Your Dad Did.
I love the transition from what was Little Village in a prototype of the Bring the Family to the Nashville Queens with that very trademark mandolin and the sound that Capitol Records just really kind of polished up like a beautiful stone. And we're definitely going to have to talk after the podcast about seeing him at the Paramount, because I'm sure I was at that show if it was after 1995, which is when, of course, this album came out. And yeah, I think this mixtape would not be complete with something from that era. And I think this is a great choice. It was his radio hit. You heard it a lot more than some of his previous singles. And it just tells a beautiful story of heartbreak. It's one of those third person narratives that I think John does very well. And it's just a rocker. I can't say anything aside from that, only that it's just a well chosen. And if we're trying to hit all the little sounds that John Hiatt has done over the course of his career, we need this. And I think it's a great choice.
John will use his voice as an instrument.
Mhm.
And this is, I think, a great example of him using the voice to sell the emotion, to sell the story, to using it. And he changes his pacing, and sometimes he's holding out vowels, and other times he's staccato. And so I just think this is another really great song that really fits. We're really cooking now.
And for those listening, just a reminder, you could hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Now, with that, Sylvan, we are on to the second half of our 12-song John Hiatt mixtape. So I'm going to throw it back to you for track 7.
Okay. And I have to throw back to the advice of my aunt and uncle that said, when you turn over the mixtape, all the bets are off. You don't have to continue on with the tone that was set because we're on a brand new side. And that was the impression that I wanted to give here, that we're starting all over again. And of that note, I myself am arguing about the choice that I've made with my pick because it seems like the deepest sacrilege to say that anything but the version of this song that appears on Bring the Family should be presented at any time. But I decided, if we are really talking about the ultimate John Hiatt mixtape, we have to allow for his revisioning of his classic song, Have a Little Faith in Me. So
Ooh.
it had to be on the mixtape. And John said that when this version got made for the best of, he felt it was like he had originally wanted to hear Have Little Faith in Me. So I'm talking the version that starts with that stark piano that we all love and then widens up to a full band version with a gospel choir. And there are wonderful lyrics in all of John's songs, but this is the one that people have chosen over and over again as their wedding song. It is poetic in its simplicity, and there's no better way to say, "Give me your love. I want to walk through this journey with you," than to say, "Have a little faith in me." And it needed to be on here, and I'm just kind of tickled that I got to be the one to pick it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you did. One of the things that Sylvan and I really were worried about is, how do we do justice on this song when we're discussing it? And we ended up having a couple of guests join us, and we went 2 hours, but that was partly because we asked people to send in their thoughts of the song, and so we added people calling and sharing, and I believe there may be a voice that's kind of familiar if you listen to that
Yeah,
episode.
there might be a guy on there.
Yeah.
I feel like I've heard that voice before. Maybe
Yeah.
when it's in my head. I don't know.
Yeah, and the other reason I think this is perfect to start out the second half is when I talk to someone and they'll go, "I don't know who John Hiatt is." I'll say, I'll name a couple of songs, and then I said, "And probably if you heard Have a Little Faith in Me, you would go, 'Oh, that song that I've heard in the movies and TV all the time.'" And so I think by having a copy of that, I mean, we ended up dozens of covers, right, Sylvan? And we ended up just uncle because they just kept giving, giving, and giving. So I think this is a perfect way to start the second half.
Look, I want to take nothing away from 1987's Bring the Family version because that's the one that we all got introduced to it with. I feel like if he was going to reimagine it, you had to do a 180 because the original is so perfect in its simplicity that if he just tried to recreate that magic, you were not going to get that lightning in a bottle. That original version is simply perfect. It's on every one of my mellow playlists, on my acoustic playlists. It's perfect. But to reimagine it the way he did, To me, you could listen to both songs back to back, and it's two completely different experiences that are both uniquely John Hiatt. You talked cover songs, Jesse. When I chimed in on the Have a Little Faith in Me episode for Perfectly Good Podcast, I mentioned Joe Cocker's version. I mentioned Jules' version from the Phenomenon movie. I mentioned Simmel's version, which people might not be familiar with, but it was featured in a Virgin River episode last year. And at the time I sent you my little clip, it was at 180,000 views on YouTube. It's up over 250 now. So this song has staying power. Oh, and I also have to mention the Electric Mayhem, because if Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem are covering a John Hiatt song, that hit me on so many levels, because that tugged on my heartstrings because I love the song, but it also was my youth paying respect to an artist I love as an adult. So there was just so many just levels of awesomeness in that version. And then lyrics right from the jump. When the road gets dark and you can no longer see, just let my love throw a spark and have a little faith in me. Shout out again to Patreon mixtaper Chad Lamassa, who chimed in with this one. I think it would be a sacrilege if we did not have a little faith in me in the first 12 songs. So I'm glad we got to it. And with that, Jesse, you have a tough decision to make here, because you have to follow up one of John's most beloved songs. So where do we go from here?
So I'm going to stay similar theme, and also another shout out to one of your patrons, right? And you ask, what am I not doing? She says, your voice cannot command. In time, you will move mountains, and it will come through your hands.
My favorite line from the song.
Betsy Hodges was on my Set Leslie Bruce podcast. She is a former mayor, and she talked about her sobriety. John Hiatt was such a huge influence and inspiration for her. She said that when she goes to heaven, she's going to ask God, how many times has she listened to Thunder Road? But she says that Through Your Hands has been one of those that is a hymn to her. Through Your Hands has a similar theme, and it is a song that I lose myself in a different way than Have a Little Faith in Me. But the idea that our hands, with these hands, we can build a better life and better future for each other. And so I had to include it.
Yeah, I think all of those reasons, it does need to be included because it has such a beautiful message and it's so well done. I also think it's important to include something from Stolen Moments, which is in its own way a very unique John Hiatt album, that it was made with studio musicians as opposed to bands that John was working with. It's different that it's actually a duet, although of course we've heard many a live version where John just sings it solo. But I love having that woman's voice to kind of really bring home the idea that it's this conversation between a person and higher self, or an angel as he refers to it. But at its best, all art reminds us of our connection and our place on the earth. And this does both. That he's having a conversation even while really doing some ultimate belly button gazing and coming up with this universal truth that we're all here to do good work and to connect to each other and do our best in whatever means that is. And yeah, it's beautifully lyrically. It's going to just give you the chills musically, and it would be incomplete without Through Your Hands.
Another exercise in songwriting perfection. When you have Joan Baez cover the song from her 1992 album, Play Me Backwards, when you have David Crosby, obviously a guy who's known to write a song or two, covered it on his 1993 record, Thousand Roads. And then Don Henley from some band called the Eagles. I don't know, you may have heard of him or not. His version from the Michael soundtrack actually hit number 33 on the US Billboard charts. Those three names all looked to John because of this song. And these are three names that people look to for their songs. So when people look to them and they're looking to John, to me, it just elevates John's prowess as a songwriter even more. And once again, I want to give a shout out to Patreon mixtaper Brandon from Virginia, who chimed in with this one. I couldn't agree more. It is a perfect song that Brandon and I could add to the Ultimate Inspirational Rock Playlist Volume 2. And I think that might be needed sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, to an angel bending down to wrap you in her warmest coat. Don't we all want that comfort sometime? It just, oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. And now I'm going to borrow a little something from Sylvan and a little something from you, Jesse. Sylvan, you had mentioned all bets are off on side B, so I'm going to go into that. And Jesse, when you were talking about your guest who talked about Through Your Hands, you had mentioned that she found hope through sobriety through that song. And it just made me think of this line. I know a drink ain't no solution. I ain't had one in 17 years. But if that tiki bar was closed tonight, well, I might just disappear. The title track to 2001's The Tiki Bar is Open. The album to me is got this dark halo over it because it was released on 9/11. So there's this like tough exterior layer to this brilliant album, his last on Vanguard Records. And thematically, it's a total from what you guys were talking about because it's John's takedown of consumerism, strip malls, tourist traps. And this is John just kind of using his music as a way to try to make change in some way, shape, or form. And he was once quoted in an article saying, for me, the tiki bar being open means that Daytona Beach is still there. This was his way of saying that an area that he loved was changing and changing and changing. But as long as that tiki bar was open, there was still hope, which ties it into Through Your Hands. But musically, it's a little bit of a different animal. And it brings us from the late 90s of Have a Little Faith in Me to the early 90s of Stolen Moments, brings us into the 2000s once again, and just kind of a different vibe. So yeah, all bets are off on side B.
And, I don't think any mix of John Hiatt would be complete without the tiki bar also, because it speaks to the, theme of alcoholism, but in a way that only John could. It's not crying in my beer. It's not, oh, thank the Lord I was saved and, I did my 12 steps or whatever. It's acknowledging that that darkness is always kind of right there on the edges. And to echo what you were saying, Brian, about Daytona Beach, I loved when John was talking about writing this song, being inspired just driving down the strip and seeing a sign and having that nostalgia and also this sadness at the same time, which I think is very much wrapped up in this song. And I think only John Hiatt can give us a song that is bittersweet in this particular way, that you really taste the bitter and you really taste the sweet. And also, by the way, you just want to get up and dance and boogie.
Right? It's all of that wrapped up in one.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, you need that on a mixtape.
Yeah, and I also think that including this gives you the sing-along chorus. John is good at those songs as well, and I think when you hear him do it live, everyone's joining in on that chorus, and it's just there is this wonderful sense of humor, and I love it, and I'm so happy it made the list.
Yeah, and I love that we get to witness John as a fan in that song with his little hat tip to Dale Earnhardt. It's so easy for me, especially to put John on a pedestal and think like, well, who does John look up to? And to hear him give that homage to the man who drove the black number 3, I thought was really lovely, even though I could care less about NASCAR personally.
Well, with that, Sylvan, we have one more round of songs. So one song choice each. Is this getting hard yet? We're back to you for track 10.
It wasn't hard. It was impossible to, I mean, literally, if you were to say, okay, you can only pick 4 songs, Sylvan, to represent all of John. Like, I couldn't, even though I have done it many times when someone says, "Okay, well, I am interested in this person that you're talking about all the time, Sylvan, because believe me, you don't wanna get stuck in an elevator with me talking John Hiatt. Just give me a little sampling so I can see if I like him." Yeah. I then have to then ask the person, "Okay, well, tell me your 4 favorite songs, and I will match," rather than try to pick and choose John Hiatt
Smart.
songs myself. Yes. But here we are. This is my last pick. What is the song that I truly could not live without in a mixtape or in a first draft of a sampling of John? And it's a song that has always meant a lot to me because it was the song that my mom used to describe my birthplace of New Orleans and give me a little bit of a taste of a heritage that I didn't get to experience firsthand because I came to New England when I was literally days old. But I was always kind of told about what it was like in New Orleans, and specifically this feeling of when the heat breaks and the rain comes in off
Ah,
of the Gulf and the ground gets cool and there's sticky heat. Probably the best love song ever written, to say, "In the sticky heat, you open up to me." And I got to hear this song in New Orleans with the man I love and dance in the rain because the Jazz Fest was nearly rained out. I could not overlook Feels Like Rain to put on this
wonderful.
mixtape.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love this song. I love the feeling. It captures such a mood, and he played it on Treme. They showed a scene of him singing it, and Steve Earle is playing a character, and he's talking to one of the female characters, and I don't remember her name, but she thinks the song's about Katrina.
Mhm.
And the Steve Earle character says he wrote this years before Katrina, but that's what's great about a truly genius song is it meaning can change multiple times.
Hmm.
I love that we're doing this. Up until this point, we had not really repeated an album. And I'm so glad that Feels Like Rain made it. I just get lost in that feeling of him and his voice, like, and it feels like rain. Just
Mhm.
it brings me joy.
When the clouds blow in across the moon and the wind howls out your name, feels like rain once again. Cover songs out the wazoo. Aaron Neville, 1991, on his album Warm Your Heart. And then some guy named Buddy Guy covered the song in 1993 and also made it his album's title track. Also, if you're a Buddy Guy fan, I just recently had on Switchfoot's Tim Foreman, and we talked about their collaborative single, Last Man Standing, between Switchfoot and Buddy Guy, which is friggin' incredible. But as much as I love Buddy, we're here to talk about John Hiatt. This song is, I'm so glad you went back to Slow Turning. If there was ever an album that was going to be repeated, I feel like this was, for me, one of the ones that would be. And this is an absolute essential.
Yes.
And I
That's
feel
it.
like we've checked off a few essentials. So there might be some John Hiatt fans that are listening to this saying, well, this was on the greatest hits and that was on the greatest hits. But I feel like we're trying to strike a balance here between the hits and some deeper cuts to give somebody who doesn't know John Hiatt kind of a spectrum of what he's all about. So, Jesse, you and I have to follow up a massive hit like Feels Like Rain. Where do we go from here with your last pick of the night?
Well, there's only 2 things in life, but I forget what they are. Uh, I'm gonna for my
Oh,
last pick, I'm picking Buffalo River Home.
yes.
One, because I think it's an absolutely wonderful song. Sometimes there's songs that you don't even have to hear the lyrics and just get a feel of the song and you enjoy. But Buffalo River Home musically is amazing, and there is some of the clearest and most clever lyrics. When you think that you've been gypped, the bearded lady comes and does a double back flip, and you run off and join the circus. Yeah, you just let that pony ride. Buffalo River Home is, and I know I keep saying this, but it is one of my favorite songs. It is a song I never get tired of. It could be on rotation and it just would do that. I feel like once again, I could just keep quoting lyrics. So I'm like, okay, if I'm going to go out with one last song, and there are the rest of the dream and a bunch of other songs that I adore, but I'm like, okay, I'm going to go with this one.
True to your positivity, Jesse, that, I think Rest of the Dream would have been a lovely pick because it does have that like hopeful, we have the future in front of us and just optimism in its very tone and every word. Buffalo River Home has that same feeling, but in a perfect John Hiatt way that it also acknowledges that life isn't perfect, that sometimes you feel like you've been gypped and then the bearded lady comes. Yeah, life isn't perfect, but it's all going to work out somehow. And it's a great sing along. I think well chosen. And, I really love that the Perfectly Good Guitar era and the Guilty Dogs get their due. The late, great Mike Ward doing an absolutely fantastic guitar on this. A mixtape wouldn't be complete without a little bit of taste of him. So well done.
It seems we're either hanging on a moonbeam's coattails or wishing on stars. Jesse, I feel like you and I have had some synergy with the lyrics we've been pulling from these songs tonight. Maybe it's me. Okay, I'm just going to say it. I have to, for the last song of tonight, double dip an album for the second time because Slow Turning got represented twice. And I know John Hiatt fans are either going to love or hate this decision, but for my last song of the night, and I got to close this out, I really tried to think about what made me the John Hiatt fan that I am today. And I could tell you that happened in 1995. And it happened the night before I drove down to college for the first time. I was in my room and I was packing up all of my things, getting ready to leave my parents for the first time and go live on my own at 17 years old, experience college. And I'm just flipping through the channels looking for something to put on in the background while I pack. And I get to PBS and there's this guy and this band performing. And I'm like, oh, what the hell? I'll just put this on. I turn up the volume. And I turned up the volume during Tennessee Plates. And this was John's Live from Austin City Limits special. And I stopped packing. And I just sat at the edge of my bed and I watched him perform Tennessee Plates, Slow Turning, and my last pick of the night, the title track, Perfectly Good Guitar, which I'm sure you guys will appreciate with the name of your podcast. But when he played Perfectly Good Guitar, I actually, when the song was over, walked out to my parents and said, is there any chance on the drive from New Jersey to North Carolina, at some point we could just stop at either a Walmart or a music store? I need to grab this CD. This song just blew my mind. He loved that guitar just like a girlfriend, but every good thing comes to an end. Now he just sits in his room all day, whistling every note he used to play. A little bit of his humor coming into play here, a little bit of his takedown on something he doesn't like. I feel like this song was directly aimed at the Garth Brooks of the world at the time, who was making it a thing on stage, smashing guitars, and this was kind of his takedown of it in true John fashion. So yes, this might not be one of the massive hits, but you guys named the podcast after it, so it has to mean something to both of you. I'm guessing in some small shape or form. And for me, it's the song that solidified my love of his music. So I didn't have much to say about Buffalo River Home because that is my second favorite song on Perfectly Good Guitar, with the third being the opening track, Something Wild, that Iggy Pop covered. So to close the first 12-song John Hiatt playlist, Perfectly Good Guitar from Perfectly Good Guitar.
So I'm going to let Sylvan have last thoughts on this. So I love Perfectly Good Guitar. It makes me smile. Chris was pretty young when this came out, and so he loved this song. Just the idea, that energy. Every time I've seen John do it, he'll pretend to
Mm-hmm.
smash the guitar and then he hugs it instead, and it just is a perfect way to end the CD or our mixtape. It sends you off with a smile, and it says that this, once again, his sense of humor. He's a rocker, right? He is Americana, but he can do country, he can do hard rock, and he's unique. And yeah, I just love it.
Well, I have to embarrass myself once again because I am that annoying person that you don't want to be sitting next to at a concert. Um, John has said in many an interview that he has smashed a guitar once out of anger because he was having such a bad songwriting night or something like that. Well, I have on videotape, and I put it up on YouTube, the time that John was on The Tonight Show promoting Perfectly Good Guitar. And at the very end, he literally smashed a guitar, and Jay Leno came over and said, "Yeah, it's the Kick Your Ass special." And I was at home watching, just like, how could he have done that? So years and years later, John said, "Oh, I've only smashed a guitar once, and this is in a concert hall full of, probably 300 people." And again, I'm annoying. I can't deny the fact that I'm a know-it-all. I signed up to be on a podcast where we literally talk about every John Hiatt song. And I just kind of called out, "And on Leno." And I kind of thought it would just like pass. And John said, "What was that?" And I actually said back, "And on Leno." And he's like, "Did I break one on Leno?" And I said, "You did." And we were just kind of going back and forth, and the whole crowd kind of laughed. And it's like, wow, I really
I,
am that person. But
I did not know this story. I love the story. I could just picture teacher, teacher. Oh, excuse me, you got that wrong.
yes, but at that point, John did say, it was a prop, which one, I forgave him for forgetting, and two, I forgave him for smashing the guitar because it was a prop. I can totally live with that. It was a fake guitar, which actually makes sense when you look back at the tape. It was
Yeah,
probably just balsa wood
it
or
it
something.
wasn't perfectly good, so it's okay
It
to
wasn't
smash it.
perfectly good. And, I do, getting back to the song, I think it's great. It represents John Rockner's side. It represents the tenderness that he can talk about how music can change us. It shows him creating a character that you kind of think is probably John Hiatt, at least some version of him, but you could also imagine as completely a fictional character. And even gets a little dirty by saying they all got wet when he smashed that thing, which went pretty much over my head the first time I heard it when I was 14. And then I realized, was that something that I should have been singing along to? But yeah. And yeah, it's crunchy, it's gritty, it's soulful, and it's also perfectly ironic because it just fits that Midwestern modesty of, yeah, oh, it's perfectly good, as opposed to absolutely freaking fantastic, which is John Hiatt in a nutshell. And hey, I think we kind of did it, guys. We got a great mix going.
I couldn't agree more. And that Mixtapers concludes volume 1 of the ultimate John Hiatt mixtape, which consists of Let It Ride from the Country Bears soundtrack, Drive South from Slow Turning, Riding with the King from the album of the same name, We're All Right Now from Mystic Pinball, Your Dad Did from Bring the Family, Cry Love from Walk On, Have a Little Faith in Me from the Best of John Hiatt, Through Your Hands from Stolen Moments, The Tiki Bar is Open from the album of the same name, Feels Like Rain from Slow Turning, and then Buffalo River Home and Perfectly Good Guitar from Perfectly Good Guitar. Head over to myweeklymixtape.com to hear all the songs we've discussed in this mix through the playlist embedded on the episode page. Sylvan and Jesse, why don't you let people know more about where they can find Perfectly Good Podcast and connect with you both on social media?
Absolutely. So please, wherever you listen to podcasts, search for Perfectly Good Podcast, John Hiatt A to Z. We have a Facebook page for the podcast, and we make ourselves quite at home in the John Hiatt fan page. That's probably the easiest way to find our own website, where we have the complete list of the songs and a target date of when we're going to be recording them. So we love having guests. Please go ahead and try to find us. And it doesn't have to be your favorite song, but look at what's coming up and send us a note, perfectlygoodpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. And, you can be our guest just like we were the guests for Brian on My Weekly Mixtape. Thank you so much.
And I am at Jesse Jackson DFW on X, aka Twitter. I want to stress what Sylvan said. A lot of people go, well, God, my favorite John song doesn't start till it, starts with an S or a W. Pick just another song and just spend some time with it. And I think you'll have a lot of fun. I am doing Set Listing Bruce Continue, part of the wonderful Pantheon Network, as is Perfectly Good Podcast.
And My Weekly Mixtape.
Yes, indeed. Where we, I talk to people about the power and the magic of music, and not just Bruce Springsteen fans, but it is always a lot of fun to have them there. And I'm always looking for guests. If you are passionate about music, if you have a favorite band, reach out to me at setlistingbruce@gmail.com, and we'll make it happen. And you can talk about why your band has made a difference in your life.
Well, Sylvan and Jesse, this has been an absolute blast. Thank you guys for keeping the episode under 12 hours long. And I'm already looking forward to seeing where Volume 2 takes us. Thank you guys so much for joining me on My Weekly Mixtape.
Thank you for keeping the mixtape alive.
Yes, and keep hope alive.
Amen. And remember, you can find My Weekly Mixtape on almost all the social media haunts at My Weekly Mixtape. You can also head to myweeklymixtape.com to check out the full catalog of My Weekly Mixtape episodes. And finally, if you like what you're hearing on the show, you can help me out by either telling a friend, leaving the show a 5-star review wherever you're tuning in, or becoming a Patreon mixtaper at patreon.com/My Weekly Mixtape. There you can find ad-free episodes of the show, gain early access to future My Weekly Mixtape episodes, chime in on upcoming topics, become a future guest, and so much more. That's all for this week. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, enjoy the tunes.